Hello and welcome to Rippercast, your podcast on Jack the Ripper and the Whitechapel murders. This is episode 22, Jack in the Docks, another kind of time capsule episode in which we discuss the Jack the Ripper in the East End exhibition that was held at the museum in the Docklands in May of 2008. And it was originally released on July 7th, 2008. Paul, a few days after opening day, the museum hosted a discussion event titled Who Was Jack the Ripper, featuring yourself, Stuart Evans, and Robin Odell. How did this come about? And could you kind of describe what took place at that?
Yes, it was what the thinking behind it was, I don't know, because I was just invited. I think Adam Wood had some input in the organisation of all that sort of thing, and he put my name forward to be one of the speakers. And I'd already been an advisor to the exhibition some 2 years ago when it was first mooted. Keith Skinner and I went along and had a meeting with the Museum of London, and we advised at various times. So that's probably how I got to be involved. And basically, what happened was that they have a very good conference room there, and we basically just turned up and we were introduced, stood at a podium, and gave our talks. I think Stuart's basically was about his time in Ripperology. It wasn't so much about who was Jack the Ripper. Robin did a basic overview of the case, and as indeed did I. I was a little more specific, I think, in what I was saying in subject areas, basically trying to point out that the attitudes to suspects, the ways in which suspects had changed over the years, and how very often they reflected the time, and how in many cases it was an effort to try or I put forward the suggestion that many of the theories attempted to give some sort of shape and form to the Ripper, so that people were less frightened of this nameless thing that lurked in the shadows. My famed lurker in the shadows theory.
And had you, I assume before you gave your presentation, you went through and saw the exhibit, or did you see the exhibit prior to that night? I think it was May 17th that you gave your talk.
Yeah, no, I'd seen it prior to that, because those of us who'd been involved with the exhibition in various ways, and indeed I assume a whole load of other people who were guests of the museum, were invited to a pre-opening showing of the exhibition itself, with little canapes and drinks and so forth, which was rather nice. And it's so I'd seen the exhibition at that time, but I'd also been responsible for with Keith for doing the cards, each of the cards that accompany the exhibit. So I knew what was going to be there as well.
Oh, so you actually had a hand in some of the description cards that were placed in it.
That's right, yes. I mean, they were keen to make sure that the description cards were accurate, and so we, Keith and myself, were sort of brought in to do that for them. And so any errors in the description cards, we'll keep quiet about, and they're all Keith's or mine. They're all Keith's, really. I mean, I didn't make them.
Well, okay. Let's get some reviews of the exhibit. Who wants to go first? Any volunteers?
I'll let John go first because I'm feeling very generous.
Okay.
Oh, me,
John Bennett.
Right.
You've been a couple of times.
Yes, I have.
Tell us what you think.
It's funny. I went there to see it on the morning before the talk that you've just been talking about, and it was strange because it was a lot to take in, and it's a bit like when you watch a film or read a book where you're not quite sure of the plot, but you know you enjoyed it, and it's like one of those sort of complicated Quentin Tarantino films or something like that with a sort of very difficult plot, and you think, well, I enjoyed it, but I'm not quite sure what happened. So, and when you see it again, then things start falling into place, and that's what happened. I went first time on my own, and I bumped into a few people from the Whitechapel Society and things like that, and I sort of came out thinking, I can't put a finger on it. It was good, and there was lots of things in there that I was pleased to see and such like, but there'd been a big discussion after my first visit about various issues that people think there was not enough of X and not enough of Y or whatever it was, and I went second time with my father, who's a bit of a sort of a Ripper buff himself, not like us, but he would have enjoyed it, and I wanted to see what it would be like just to take someone who's got a bit more of the man in the street about him, and he came out and said, yeah, it was all right, it was. But one thing I did sort of notice when I went round again, and there was that big discussion about how the victims were treated. Going round second time, I sort of thought, well, yeah, they could have had a little bit more about the lives of the victims. I know they had a thing at the end, a little display with the photographs in it, and with a booklet that had a little bit about them. But just as you went round, I felt sometimes it sort of got a bit lost. The victim side of it got a bit lost amongst all the exhibits. But I'll probably come up with some more things as we go on. But I came out thinking, yes. It was successful, and like Stuart Evans said on the casebook board, what do we expect from an exhibition on Jack the Ripper? It's quite a difficult thing. An exhibition on Jack the Ripper itself, I felt probably would never happen. There'd be too many arguments, in terms of taste or whatever. Why do you want an exhibition on a serial killer? An exhibition on the East End on its own would be fine, but where do you start, where do you finish? And I thought to bring the two together puts a sort of a time frame on an era, and a lot of us are interested in the East End as well as Jack the Ripper as well, and the two sort of go together. But then again, there's so much in terms of Jack the Ripper, and there's so much in terms of the East End at that time, so there was a lot to fit in, and I think it was pretty much successful on the whole. It was probably a tough call to come up with something that would certainly keep us lot happy. I'm sure the man in the street came away thinking, "Ooh, yeah, good." But I sort of thought it was successful in the end.
And you liked it better the second time you went than the
yes, because second time I actually saw a few things in there that I missed first time. So I've suddenly found that people were saying, "Oh, they've got Aberline's cane in there," and I thought, "Oh, I didn't see that." So I feel like a right idiot. So yeah, I was able to sort of take in more things and get a better sort of feel of how the exhibition progressed. There was a few things in there I thought, well, what's that doing there? But
there's a stuffed bloodhound spring to mind.
Sort of. I think it was a painting of a Minotaur was the one that I wasn't quite.
Yeah,
with Sims, but just a couple of things when they were sort of trying to outline what the East End was like, and I think people have said. Some sort of little recreation of a scene or a room, of an East End room at the time, like you read about in the Nickel or the sort of philanthropists who've gone round and done reports on how people were living. A little sort of, it'd probably be ghastly to look at, but it would give people a bit more of an immediate idea of the conditions at the time, and just little recreations of things like that. But certainly where there was actual things like the Fosse Jaw and stuff about the Match Girl strike, which was quite important, in 1888. Things like that, I thought, that's important to the whole East End at the time. The stuff about the Ripper, I thought, was really good. The things they included there, the various artifacts and the reports. So, but yeah, I think it sort of worked on the whole. But there were a few wobbly bits in it, as they say, and not just the bloodhound.
Now, I've seen the map of the exhibit that's online at their website, and it seems that they have each little section has an overall theme to it, and as you walk through the exhibit, you know, the general theme of the little location you're in changes as you go around. Is that noticeable? I mean, someone explained to me who hasn't been and won't be going, you know, kind of how they have the different sections organized. Because I had heard that the Dear Boss letter, for instance, maybe shoved off somewhere, like you could maybe miss it, or it's like not in a prominent location where some people would think it should be. But then I also heard, I think from Philip's review, that John Thurtell's a wax figure of Thurtell is something that pretty much greets you at the door.
Yes.
So maybe Philip can take us through the exhibit and fill us in on some of those.
Yeah, certainly. As you go in,
tour guide hat.
I'm not going to do it in a tour guide mode today, thank you. As you go in, there's a couple of staff that check your ticket at the door, because the admission to the exhibition is separate to the admission for the rest of the Docklands Museum. But yeah, as soon as you go in, there's a rather bizarre thing of this wax head, and next to it, the straw inner body for Tussaud's waxwork of William Burke. I'm thinking, what have these got to do with the Ripper? Apparently, their excuse for them being there is the fact they're on exhibition at Tussaud's at the time. So it's not particularly relevant. Then you're met by a huge cyclorama going around, wrapping round a wall of various snippets from early Ripper films, you know, such as Hitchcock's 27 version of The Lodger and Lulu and things like that. It then leads into an early part, just going around the corner. It's suddenly got a big sign on the wall speaking of all the victims' names and their years of birth and the exact dates of death. And I personally thought the fact you only have their year of birth and not the exact dates, but the exact dates of their death, seemed to speak volumes to me about their attitude towards the victims. Then going around the corner, you're met with early things from 1888, things that actually gave almost a kind of pre-rise to the Ripper myth. For example, there was things there to do with Mansfield's performance of Jekyll and Hyde. They've actually found an old carte de visite, the famous image of the metamorphosis of Mansfield. They put that in an entire case by itself, which I thought was possibly giving it a little too much priority that it didn't really need. But it then goes through the madness of the times, that they speak about the various strikes and indeed that Minotaur picture was meant to be speaking, supposedly the image itself was meant to be speaking about the dichotomy of the human condition. I'm thinking, which is probably reading a little bit too much into what the image was supposed to be. You then turn around the corner and this whole long corridor doubles back on itself, and you're met with things like market traders' carts and sewing machines and various butchers' knives and tailors' scissors and things. And there's various screens all around the place, certainly starting here, showing just a sequence in rotation of images of the London Victorian poor. But they have got a screen there showing, in I presume its entirety, the film of Petticoat Lane Market, taken I think it's 1903, and that for me was I'm sure for John as well, was fantastic to see moving images. We're always seeing photographs of people walking around Petticoat Lane Market selling and buying clothes and stuff, but to see a few minutes of actual moving film was wonderful. And obviously everybody's paying attention. Well, everyone's paying attention to the camera. And sometimes you can clearly see people as saying things. It'd be lovely to find out what it was they're actually saying. But when you've actually gone through that bit about the but in Hebrew, I imagine, probably. But when you've gone through that, it then goes through into a slightly dark room. The whole exhibition seems to be in semi-darkness. Now, if that's to preserve the documents or to just give some kind of semblance of something unpleasant, I'm not too sure. It then goes through a section. It then goes into an area which is speaking about the dwelling houses and the rebuilding of the common lodging houses, a bit of the slum clearance, and there's people, archive recordings, little clips of speaking about people's final years in things like the Rothschild buildings before they were demolished, and saying how they used to go out and get the coal and the wood and do the washing outside and that kind of thing. There's little sections on the Salvation Army, on prostitution. All of this is interspersed with various versions of the Booth poverty maps. And it kind of struck me as weird as it's in a way that's kind of wasted. You needed one Booth poverty map, but they keep repeating different versions of the same section again and again. And there's huge swathes of walls that are sometimes empty. There's bits of display cases empty. And you often think that they could have put more in here if they'd only actually rationed their time a little bit better to start with. So generally the first two rooms are almost entirely dealing with working conditions and various conditions of poverty, and it's only when you get into the last room, which is quite a big room, that you start to deal with the case itself. All the way through this previous bit, there has been a kind of timeline. There's been boards on the walls speaking of the victims and little news snippets which are presented on the boards. Incidentally, I have to say, and I think Rob Clack pointed this out on the boards as well, they tried to have arrows pointing to the murder locations on each of the boards, but they've actually got, I think almost all of them are in completely the wrong place. Now, if they're trying to just denote the street or the area, then that's fine, but if they're trying to be exact about the spots, they were way out. When you get into the final room, you start to get to the exhibits that people really want to see. The various letters sent to the press, Abeline's scrapbook, his walking cane, which is something I'd personally wanted to see for years. And things like, although, you know, obviously its provenance is extremely dubious, but the knife that Don Rumbelow owns, which curiously has now been reconstructed. It's been welded back together again, and you can't even see the join. I'm presuming most people know that it's been in two parts for years. But then you go back to the thing about the priority. Rumbelow's knife has been stuck in a display case along with a load of comics and cinema programs, and you think Rumbelow's knife has been stuck in the side of a cabinet with all these things. And this photograph of Mansfield has a whole display cabinet to itself. You're kind of thinking, you know, that maybe that's not the way it should be. And it kind of finishes off with something I thought worked very well. They had a load of pictures of various suspects, and they'd done them on a timeline showing when they first became a suspect, which is something I never really considered before. And it kind of brings things into perspective, seeing, obviously when you know why they've been named as suspects, but seeing all these names and various suspects along this date line and seeing just how many start cropping up when you get to the modern era. There is also this small thing in the corner of the victims. I personally didn't think this worked. I found it almost distasteful, but that could have been my analysis of the way it was presented. They had a tiny little rounded area lit in very bright white light with the walls white as well, with a warning saying, you know, that there's very graphic pictures in here. And inside you've got tiny little, almost carte de visite size pictures of the victim set into this huge white area. Now, some people said, that they thought that was actually, you know, nice and pure and heavenly. Well, I found that idea rather mawkish. To me, it struck more of a kind of clinicism of a mortuary. And to me, that didn't work, and I found that distasteful. I personally think there should have been photographs of the victims through the exhibition. People go in there know very well what they're going to see. I found it almost patronising to the visitor myself.
I thought the thing at the end that you've just been talking about with the victim photographs, and it reminds that it was Brighton Polytechnic Fine Art Degree Show 1988 sort of.
Yes,
it was like a little installation.
Yeah, you're right. It seemed like the pictures were almost being used as art. You're right. Yeah,
which is a bit. I mean, I don't know quite how another way of they would have done it, but yeah, it just seemed a bit strange. But this idea about with the victims stuff, where when each victim appeared in the sort of in the room, you know, as you were going along, because as Philip was just saying, starts off with mostly about the East End, and then you notice little bits about the Whitechapel murders creeping in until you get to the last room, and then it's you know, that's the big tamale where they've got all, you know, loads of stuff in it. and it's basically sort of completely like based on Ripper and the police and all that sort of thing. And the victims bit was getting a bit. I don't want to keep going on about the victims, but it did strike me second time round. They would have had the name of the Mary Ann Nichols, date of birth, year, time of dying, and then sort of a clip from a newspaper. And I just thought maybe on there it might have been nice to just sort of say a little bit about her life, and how it changed and what became of her in the end, and that was put in there. But also that the maps, because they were using the Booth map, which I think was a sort of an 1870s map. So there were a lot of, in some cases, the maps had buildings in there that weren't there in 1888, for example, and like the Bucks Row one was wrong, and the location pointed to right up the end of the street, which I know some people think it's that end. I won't say who. But yeah, so little things like that. It's just. But yeah, it sort of crept up. The victim, not the victim, but just the Jack the Ripper stuff sort of began to creep in amongst the East End stuff in the first two rooms, and then like I say, you get the big. I was a little bit disappointed by the way the Dear Boss letter was. I think Jonathan mentioned this about the way the Dear Boss letter was displayed. It's brilliant that it was there, and there was some great exhibits there. But that, to me, was like a very important little document. Tiny though it is, I don't know how you would make it more prominent. It was just by the side of a door, and it was just a little bit out of the way, considering it's the thing that gave us the name in the first place.
Also, the thing that did upset a lot of people was the fact that they showed the front side of it and not the back side of it with actually right. Jack the Ripper written down. Yeah. Now, they could have probably got through that by actually exhibiting the letter upright in a glass case where you could see both sides of it, and not having to use a reproduction for the back.
Yeah, and people being allowed to walk round it rather than it being...
Yeah. Is that what they did? They used the reproduction for the back?
That's right.
Okay.
In fact, there's a lot of the documents where it looks genuine, but they have used reproductions in it.
And what about the victim photographs? Are those all reproductions?
Oh, yeah. In fact, they almost look like photocopies.
Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to say one thing, and I'm not an apologist for the Docklands people, and I don't know... what their motivations were at all and how they put the displays up. But I was reading one of their study guides for students that they have on their website, and they have these, it's designed for teachers, and when they get to the sections for the victims' photographs and the Dear Boss letter, there are these little, instructions. Now, these locations are easy for you to avoid. You can shield your students' eyes. It's so maybe they intended on putting them in bizarre places or obvious or well lit place or whatever school children wouldn't stumble upon them. I don't know. That's just an idea. Is that they seemed to make a point to warn and teachers, that this part of the exhibit is easily avoided. This part of the exhibit is easily avoided.
Well, I'm presuming.
Before we get into a parsing of, I'd like to hear Jana's overall perspective, because I believe she's also been to the exhibit. So before we get into the individuals, I was just wondering what Jana's overall take on the exhibit was.
Not as dedicated a ripperologist as many on this podcast. I went after this at a more... just an overall view. And I didn't have a problem with the exhibit. What I had a problem with, I agree with what has been said and the way it was laid out. Some of the things that were included, I'm still trying to get over the stuff, Bloodhound. I've got to write that into a book, honest to God. But the one thing that I think that they could have helped their case a little bit if they had spent maybe 5, 7, 8 minutes and made a film that would have laid out a little of this, the background of what was going on in the East End, so the people, because I don't assume automatically that people who live in England have as much of a background about English history as I do, because I know how history is taught here, and I think you guys have the same problem. So I think it would be nice to bring folks up to speed as to what the East End was like, and then bring them in and talk about the murders and give a little more overview of the victims. And you could perceivably, ahead of before they saw the big tamale, as it were, give them a movie that would, or a video that would give them an overview of the crimes and what was going on, so that when they walked into that big room with all the goodies, they'd have a better chance of tying some of that down, because it just seemed kind of disconnected unless you knew, when I did happen to see Aberline's cane. I didn't get to see Don Rumblow's knife, which really PO'd me until I got home and found out that it was there, and I was too busy looking at videos. But so you would have some preparation when you're walking in there, because I think the assumption was the people who came into that exhibit would have a fair amount of background, and I don't think that's necessarily the case. Now, I might be wrong about that. In the grand scheme, I think they did a decent job for what they had to do and what they were trying to show and trying to but I think it could have been refined a little bit more so that it had a little bit more impact.
Thank you.
Sure, thank you.
I want to discuss the victims, because I know that they were, everyone was sort of trying not to focus on that as they went along on their piece, because it was so controversial on the boards. And I'm not very much a person who canonizes or really. I don't get the whole victimization as I see it. But when I found out they did have a stuffed bloodhound and no artifacts, which I just found out 2 seconds ago when you guys were discussing it, and that does seem to me like it was a significant slight as far as artifacts that they could have brought in to show the lives of the victims. Was there any attempt to address the general state of a person's life, whether it was the victims or just the general life of an East End person at that time? What kind of attempt was made to show the life of a person?
Well, one thing I know.
Sorry, go on, John.
Yeah, the one thing I noticed, there was because we all know how prominent the Jewish population were at that time, and there was just one little case with some sort of Hebrew texts and sort of pamphlets for various Jewish meetings. But from what Ally's been saying, one thing that I did think could have been played on a little bit more in a different way was they had a little section in a corner about drink, and all it was a pub table with a couple of sort of facsimiles of the front of a newspaper and 2 mirrors from a pub on the wall, and the picture of the plague of the new plague of London, whatever the map that's got all the pubs marked out. And I sort of thought, considering how drink was quite a major feature, certainly with the victims, and maybe their families as well, how we know how today, that prostitutes today may be sort of fueling drug habits. They were sort of had drink problems and all the rest of it. It was quite it was considered quite a big thing. And all we had was a little pub table. It looked like I was waiting for Dud and Pete to sit at it, to start talking to each other. And that was all it, that was all it was, and that was it. And I sort of felt, once again, it would give us an idea of how the victims became, in the condition that they ended up in, having things like Bright's disease or whatever it is, just going from pub to pub, or just eking out a living. And I thought that was quite an important thing, and that just got a tiny little table. That was one example, but I thought that could have been made a little bit more of.
And
I don't know if anyone else knows that.
You were going to chime in on that one too?
Yeah, well, just following on from what John said, I mean, that certainly strikes me as true as well. I just get the feeling all the way through that they'd planned how they were going to lay out the exhibition area really well, and they'd planned each section, and they'd thought well on that. But when it actually came to filling it with the artifacts for the space they'd designated, they seemed to have often left it to the last minute. Some things seemed to be covered very well, other things just weren't done properly, and that's one example. To further Ally's question about what was said about the people at the time, there was actually also a section on prostitution, and there was one of these talking heads videos from a woman speaking about what it was like for women at the time and what it's like for prostitutes in the East End now. So it wasn't kind of ignoring their victim status, it was ignoring the actual individuals.
Now, a lot further on that point, I mean, I don't know how it would have been presented if it would have been in text or yet another video. I'm not sure how many talking head videos there were in this exhibit, but if they had bonnets and sewing kits and stuff like that, you would think that they could mention the fact that these women left children behind. And were from broken homes when they were children, and I mean, because if it does seem like their lives, we know who these individuals are, we know the lives they led, so they would be examples. I mean, let's put their deaths aside. They would be examples of what a certain population of the East End was like back then, and that was completely neglected.
Go ahead, Jana.
I was thinking that, one of the options they could have done is, of course, with the talking heads, we could have gone to someone acting as if they were one of the ladies on the streets, not necessarily one of the victims, but one of the ladies on the streets at that point in time. And, have her, I'm always thinking of the Michael Huey play that he does, and you get a sense of the victims in that play. And I got to see that at a couple of the Ripper conventions. And so if you had someone who actually acted as if they were one of the ladies from 88, who earned their living on the street, and she could pass on in just saying, what her life was like and how afraid she was, how afraid they were to actually go out and conduct their business because of the Rippers' work. And the other thing that struck me is the thing that they had at the Wolverhampton Ripper Conference that hit me the hardest, I think, was they had created a display of what a mannequin with what Kate Eddowes would have been wearing the night she died, based on the police reports. And they'd also set up a display case with representations of the items that she was carrying on her person because she was homeless. And I think it would have been a lot more. That really caught me because I'm looking at the little bits that this woman carried with her, her little bit of her little tiny broken comb and all the things, and it humanized her. And I half wonder if they had done something of that nature, maybe that would have gotten us a little bit more in touch with what these ladies lived like, and might give us a little bit more insight into their eventual deaths. It's just something that had caught me at the time when I got out of the exhibit. I thought, why didn't they do something like that? Because that really had an impact on me.
Well, I was thinking of something a bit like that. Would have been good because, I mean, if you think about it, the exhibition, I guess, it's open to everybody. It's not just something for quote Ripperologists to sort of for their sort of pleasure. It's. And without wanting to sort of insult the intelligence of just the general public who are going to come in who don't really know that much about it, I got the feeling that they could have left the exhibition probably not much the wiser if they were the sort of types that just got their idea of the victims or Jack the Ripper, or certainly the victims, from, say, watching films where they're all like sort of busty Barbara Windsors and, with quite elegant Victorian clothes and maybe a little bit of dirt on their face. And like Jana, you were saying that, they had their clothes were in a terrible state, and a lot of the time they had all their belongings in the pockets, and something like that certainly would have served to sort of humanise them. Just basically so, I mean, we know the backgrounds of the victims, and we know how they came to be, how they were, and what happened to them. But the man, woman in the street who's just sort of thinks, I'll go and see this exhibition, sounds interesting, possibly doesn't. So I think something like that, where it just actually sort of busts a few myths about, they're not all sort of glamorous ladies going, here, sweetie, do you want a good time or whatever. They were real issues, and it would have, something like that would have served to humanise them, I think.
Right. Well, I have an interesting perspective on this because most of y'all know me from the boards, and I'm a person of particular opinions. But when this argument is going on about how more details of their lives should be given to humanize them, or I guess to make the viewer seem more sympathetic, I actually have the opposite reaction, because I'm a person who, when I first began studying the case, and I knew nothing about the ladies other than the fact that they had been murdered by Jack the Ripper and they were prostitutes, I had tremendous sympathy for the women as concepts, as, women who were murdered. And I found myself, the more I got to know them, the less the less I cared about them, but the less I liked them individually. I mean, if we look at these women, they are flawed women. They are women who, abandoned their families. They stole from their employers. They weren't necessarily the most likable women. And so while I would never say, I know, I'm making people choke here, but while I would obviously never say that, anybody deserves to be murdered. Knowing nothing about them but the fact that they were murdered prostitutes of Jack the Ripper, I found myself much more sympathetic to them than once I learned the particulars of their lives. And because I do see people as people who are collections of their own choices and the types of lives that they choose to live or what they do with their lives. And so if we're talking about showing her dress, her collection of belongings, Kate Eddowes here, I think that would humanize them. But when we're talking about biographies, really what do you include in these biographies was sort of what I would always think about. I mean, do you only include the good bits so that people get a sense of humanity about them, in which case you're ignoring all of the other aspects of their lives? Or if they had put those sorts of things in, this victim stole, this victim did that, would there have been complaints about how they were only portraying them, in these sort of negative lights? And so, I don't know, I saw both sides of it as, do you always want to know more? Or can people take away from it these poor women without having to know all of those details?
Well, maybe one way of looking at it was maybe say humanise them is maybe the wrong sort of phrase, but I was thinking maybe if they're just given the facts, just this is what she did, the good and the bad. They've gone from living in Windsor 1 minute, and the next thing you know, they're sort of trying to dodge paying DOS money or whatever it is. Without sort of shoving it down people's throats and saying, look, this lady was actually a really good person who fell on hard times, you must feel sorry for her. But just say, no, this is what happened, and without sort of coming over with a sort of a moral high ground of it. And then people would probably walk away with their own opinion of it. So, yeah, I don't think it's a case of sort of building them up into sort of these sort of poor people we're all supposed to go, but it's just the facts, just what we know about them, done quite sort of neutrally, I guess, would have been a good thing.
Well, maybe one of you can comment more on what the section on prostitution entailed, but I agree with what Jana was saying, how it would have been helpful, and maybe this is something that went into the exhibit, kind of subconsciously, is what Ally was referring to, is this avoidance of confronting what typified the women of this social class that these victims were in, and so that's kind of what I would have liked to. I mean, I'm not going to see it as I said, but that's something that I would be interested in seeing presented, is just what was typical of, whether it was a specific victim or not. What was typical of this social class of women that the victims belonged to, but it maybe what was apparently they had a section on prostitution, but does anyone want to comment further on this one?
Can I just jump in here?
Please,
and just raise a sort of little question? It's one of the things. All these things about what they should have done and what they did do and so forth. I think one of the questions that immediately sprang to my mind, even before I went to see the exhibition myself, and I did have serious reservations at one point, But I think one of the questions about the event is how the organisers conceived the exhibition, because if you look at the book, the accompanying book doesn't have very much about Jack the Ripper in it at all, and as I've said in a review in Ripperologist, you get the feeling that the people who contributed to the book didn't know very much about Jack the Ripper either. So the whole thing is it's Jack the Ripper in the East End and so forth, and you buy that book and you open it and you expect to be told something about Jack the Ripper, but there isn't even a chapter about the Ripper. You get an error-filled introduction, and basically that's it. So were the organisers really that interested in Jack the Ripper? Or were they interested in doing a semi-academic exhibition about the East End of London and thought, well, that's not going to bring very many people in, so let's call it Jack the Ripper, and maybe that'll put the bums on seats, so to speak. Which were the organisers trying to do, and how does the exhibition in itself reflect those particular interests? Because I feel as well that I wonder whether there was in fact some conflict amongst the people who were organising it, because obviously the guy who edited the book, who's in charge, is the boss there. If the book's anything to go by, his view of what the Ripper should be, an exhibition should be about, is that you exclude Jack the Ripper. So the exhibition organisers, did they conceive this? Do you think that the exhibition itself reflects an understanding of the Ripper case? Because from what you're saying, it doesn't necessarily do that. From the impressions that you've received, it's and about the victims. Just the point, picking up on what Ally was saying, I actually agree with what Ally was saying. Basically, we're talking about a bunch of women here who are bag ladies, and when you're walking down the street and you've got some dirty drunken old woman pushing her supermarket trolley along, swearing at you and hurling abuse, I mean, do you stop and wonder how she ever got into that position? And again, I just wonder if there are any would-be historians of the future who are going to look back on the lives of these people and think, God, the 21st century, they had people who were homeless and wandered the streets and were mentally ill, and they weren't looked after. And try to use the lives of these people to illustrate that thing.
Well, I don't think the women should have been deified in any way. They just needed a bit of honesty, a bit of coverage, which the exhibition didn't give them. I'm in no way in favour of trying to be some kind of historical revisionist and making them out to be angels, because we know for a fact they weren't. It would just be nice if there was something about the people.
Which individuals did get specific coverage? Can you compare their coverage to, say, another prominent person in the case?
Nobody. No victims, no suspects, no police individuals. None of them got specific coverage in the exhibition. Some of them were mentioned in passing, and exhibits from the individuals, certainly when it came to the police, were put up there. But they didn't focus on any individual at any point.
And the victims should have been specially treated. Why? Yeah, and so the victims should have been given more than anyone else was given?
Only in the sense that we're speaking of murder victims here. So therefore, in my view, there should be perhaps slightly more sympathy for them than there should be for others. But I mean, I certainly agree that everybody, all individuals involved with the case should have had it. But this is really addressing Paul's wider question of the fact that was it just an exhibition about the East End and Jack the Ripper was a convenient thing? If that is the case, then there wouldn't have been enough space to have covered all the things that we'd like to see in there.
I think that just to comment on the victim bit there, the fact that they were murder victims obviously is important, but I don't necessarily think that in particular warrants that they have greater space or time given to them than anybody else. But what is terribly important about it, and what would have been and should have been done, is really to use the lives of those victims to show how other people lived, because they were not unusual. They were par for the course. There were hundreds and hundreds of women were out on the streets every night in the East End doing exactly the same thing that they did. They just happen to end up as being victims of Jack the Ripper, and we remember them. And because there is information out there, and because their lives were looked at in some detail for the inquests and so forth, we know about these people. We don't know about the majority of women who were struggling to survive in the East End at that particular time. So by picking on these women's lives, the fact that they were murdered by Jack the Ripper caught them like flies in aspic, and their lives are there, and we can research them and learn about them, and it will reflect life in general. And in that respect, I think the exhibition did itself a big disservice by not talking about the victims' lives, because that's how you springboard off into what life was like in the East End at that time.
Yeah. I think maybe the issue here is that the exhibition does speak about the circumstances of their deaths, and if you're going to do one, then you should do the other.
Well, their deaths are almost kind of immaterial. The thing about Jack the Ripper that people tend to forget is that the Ripper very, very quickly spun off into this semi-fictional character. And so whilst at one hand we're talking about Jack the Ripper, a serial killer, the reality is that for most people, Jack the Ripper isn't the same isn't a Ted Bundy. He's a semi-mythical creature like Dracula and Frankenstein's monster and all that sort of thing. So there are these two elements. Now, a lot of people go along to the exhibition expecting the more, the fictional side of the Ripper, because that's the common image that we've got. That's the iconic image that we have. And I think, we can talk about the victims, but tend to forget that just because we call the victim Annie Chapman, half the time, as you say, we're thinking about the busty Barbara Windsor, not about the real woman, because our image of the Ripper, or a lot of people's image, not ours particularly as Ripperologists, but we have a different view of how these people looked.
I think on a sort of slightly side note, Paul mentioned about the sort of the iconography of Jack the Ripper and he's a sort of mythical character who's become just like Dracula or Sweeney Todd. I felt that the exhibition didn't play on that. I mean, it might be something I didn't pick up on, but that is the sort of the idea that everybody out there seems to have of Jack, the top hat and the bag and the cloak and the fog and the busty Barbara Windsors. And I got the thing, it didn't play on that at all, apart from right at the beginning when they had sort of clips from like the lodger, and it developed that sort of melodrama. I didn't feel that it played on that.
So the beginning and the end, you went in and you had that, and then at the end you had all those comics, as you say, and books and things.
Yeah,
so you got it when you came in, and you got the
That's
fictionalized bit when you went out, but it didn't really gel.
It didn't go throughout the whole thing. But on the front of the book, there he is, man with a top hat. So
yeah.
I thought in the fog, yes. I thought the book was quite good. If you just try and think to yourself, this is not a book about Jack the Ripper. It's a book about the East End, which it most definitely was. I found it quite interesting. It dealt with a lot of East End things in a different way. There was a lot.
Yeah, it was all fairly going on, but all fairly basic stuff, though.
But it was.
There are other books on the East End out there. Yes, as a Jack the Ripper book, it was awful.
Yeah, it was pretty non-existent in that field.
Yes, well, as a book about Jack the Ripper, of course, it wasn't one.
Yeah.
And one last point about the victims that I want to make is that I agree that they should have maybe been given a little bit more coverage, if only because they were or at least their social class should have been given a little bit more of an explanation, at least because that was the social class that the victims belong to, that Jack the Ripper. If you're going to title the exhibit Jack the Ripper, this social class was the group from which he picked his victims. But I can also see the other side, to where and what Paul was saying kind of sparked this in me, is that, yes, there were hundreds of prostitutes on the streets of East London at the time. Let's see what their lives were like. But at the same token, there were hundreds of police officers on the streets of the East End at the same time as well. And are we going to go into what the life was like for the beat cop, and what things that they carried on their persons, and what their existences may have been like, so there are kind of two sides of this, and how much an exhibit can give.
Well, I also think it boils down to the bottom line is that the people who have such a high priority on emphasizing the victims' lives, I think it all boils down to that basic part of us all that feels a tremendous sense of guilt that we find pleasure and enjoyment on what is basically the murder of 5 women. And most of us are in it for the historical mystery aspect of it, but every one of us has had that awkward moment of trying to explain to someone why we're in it for Jack the Ripper. And there's this need to explain it away, to sort of mitigate that guilt that we could take pleasure in a mystery that hinged upon the death of 5 women. And it's really interesting that when it comes to murder victims, there have been billions of people killed in one way or another throughout history, and people who take pleasure in reenacting Civil War enactments and taking great delight in shooting each other across the field with fake muskets. They don't feel that same sense of guilt, even though they are basically doing exactly what occurred here, which is killing people. But there is that aspect that an interest in this is morbid, and therefore we need to mitigate it in some respect. And that's of course, my opinion.
I agree with you entirely, and it's often occurred to me that people watch war films all the time. You can have most countries have got war museums where you go around and look at the weaponry of war, all of which is designed about shooting. I mean, and killing people? Does anybody worry about movies that show the gunfight at the OK Corral? We enjoy these things. They're used as forms of entertainment. Even major disasters like the sinking of the Titanic gets to be used as a form of major entertainment because it transcends the ordinary. It transcends the mundane. Most serial killers and serial killings are they're very unpleasant people that you wouldn't want to go and watch a musical about an all singing, all dancing Ted Bundy. That would be completely wrong. But people will make a musical out of Jack the Ripper. It's but that's because the Ripper has transcended the norm and did so very quickly, even at the time.
Right, just the idea of a museum exhibit on a serial killer is pretty unusual. I know that some places have tried to have exhibits on the paintings of John Wayne Gacy, and people will show up in front and with picket signs and such. So there are museums like springs to my mind the 6th floor exhibit in Dallas. About the assassination of Kennedy. That's a permanent institution. It's very rare for an exhibit to focus on murders. So maybe they had just some issues.
There are exhibits of the Dracula Museum in Whitby. Somebody set up a Dracula theme park, I think, in Transylvania. There are lots of things. I mean, let's not forget the London Dungeon has turned Jack the Ripper into an entertainment as well.
Yeah, very poorly as well, as somebody used to work there.
Well, yes, I'm not arguing the quality of the event, but I'm just trying to say that you go there even now and you look at the French Revolution site and you see some poor model's head. I mean, not a model. But
if only
a dummy. Well, yes, I was trying.
Isn't that the same thing, Paul?
Well, yes, it's one of the same. Yes, I'm getting into trouble here. I'm just trying to get myself out of it.
Yeah.
And then I'm thinking Ally's going to say something really scathing, and she said, and she's the one who agrees. And
But there's also things.
They cut the head off and water squirts out on the back people, if you remember, at the London dungeon, where the guillotine down, as the guillotine chops the head off, water squirts out of a window at the back people.
Very briefly, they've removed that now. We used to have to stand at the back with polystyrene cups filled with water, and we threw it over the audience. That's what it was.
Yes, well, I mean, it's just I thought it was something a little more automated than that.
Yeah, unfortunately not.
I realised it was that basic, but still. But isn't that kind of fairly disgusting? Really, is that you're turning the French Revolution into kind of a couple of guys with paper cups full of water, chucking it over people at the back of the crowd to make them feel as if they've been spattered with mud.
But the whole idea of that exhibition is purely entertainment. It's highly distasteful if you're trying to look at it academically. The majority of the items in there have little relation to actual historical fact. It's always going on the gore aspect, and the gore and the dark side, and it is purely for entertainment. So yes, if you're looking at it that way, the whole thing is distasteful.
But it is just
about.
Right, sorry, let's have Jana chime in.
What I was going to say is, if you think about it, the French Revolution and what they were doing with the guillotines was, in some ways, public entertainment, much like the hangings outside Newgate used to be. We do have that dark side of us who likes the dark stuff, and we have to feed it every now and again. And luckily, we found a way of doing this in a reasonably academic form.
And John?
Yeah, and don't forget, we talk about the Jack the Ripper sort of transcending what it actually is, and don't forget they used to have a pub named after him, which is a very odd thing. Thinking about it now.
But then again, it isn't. There's a pub called the Tyburn. Nobody seems to have objected to that.
And there was one. It used to be called the Hanging Tree, which was down Edgware Road from the spot of Tyburn itself.
And I'm sure there are a number of other pubs that are named after fairly nasty individuals. If one could,
oh right, that's true.
Sure, there's probably a Crippen somewhere or whatever. But
there's a Captain Kidd in Wapping.
Well, there you go. There you are. That seems an obvious one. That commemorates drowning a man in the Thames. Or something.
Well, I was going to see if Mike Covell and Hull has been awfully quiet. Let's have him ask some questions here, Mike.
I think pretty much the big question I had was it value for money? I mean, would you go again? Would you advise people to go again?
Yes.
Or would you advise them to stay away?
Yeah.
There speaks a true northerner.
Yeah, I'd definitely go again, just to pick up the stuff that I missed, which unfortunately my time in London was so limited I didn't get an opportunity to do that. But I think, yes, I agree with John. A second pass probably would have been a benefit.
I kind of got my value for money first time. I had a lot of time to kill, so I was there for about 2.5 hours, and I got to see everything, so I don't need to see it again. But for a fiver, for the 2.5 hours of that exhibition, I think it was certainly worth it.
Sure.
And John, do you think that it benefited you the second time around because you were with someone who wasn't quite as keyed into the case as you were, that you were maybe able to kind of vicariously, see the exhibit through the eyes of like the who the exhibit's intended to serve? Or?
Yeah, that was. I found it useful because as I was taking my dad around, every now and again, if I saw something that was something that I knew that he'd sort of had an angle on or something like that. I mean, he was very keen to see the Maybrick Diary. Whatever anyone thinks about it, it's quite a sort of a notorious document, and I was quite pleased to see it personally. But as I went round, I would sort of point things out to him and say, "Look, that's an original document. That's not that one." And it was like sort of taking a kid round, I suppose. Sorry, Dad, but it was like sort of taking a kid round, just trying to show them, things of note. So, which helped make me look a bit closer as well, because there's a lot there. It's quite dark, and you can find yourself whizzing through it a bit too quick. But yeah, certainly a second viewing is worth it, unless of course you think it was so awful that you think I'm not going again. But I think, on the whole, it was pretty successful, and a second viewing wouldn't do any harm, I don't think.
For me, the mortuary cart was the most interesting thing, besides Aberline's cane. I would just kind of, because it was the mortuary cart, it was kind of a darkened area, so if you let your imagination wander, you could have a great deal of fun with that, in picturing it on the streets and rolling through Whitechapel with people standing on either side.
And you could see through one end, straight through it, and that was kind of dark. And the fact that the canvas on top had all this staining on it, although it's probably water staining, you can let your imagination run riot.
It did.
What did you all think of the walking stick? Incidentally, what did you think? Did you think that face represents anything on the stick, or is it just?
I don't
That's
know.
an excellent question.
I don't know either.
I would like to think that it is meant to represent the Ripper, but I think that's just us being fanciful and us really hoping for something that we're not going to get an answer to.
Did the face on the stick have a really huge moustache? I can't remember.
A huge moustache, a top hat, and a swirling cape. No, for me,
looked very Jewish face as well.
Yeah, it's very
yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
and a bit like the school teacher as well.
I don't know.
Covered all bases.
Would Aberline want to carry around a cane for the rest of his life that had that face on it, if indeed he hadn't been able to catch the Ripper? If he hadn't been able to genuinely ID to himself, at least, who he thought it was. Would he want that remembrance?
It would be a monument to his failure.
Yeah, every time he picked it up, he'd look at it and go, "Bugger," I lost that. I mean,
Alternatively,
it's
he may have picked it up and looked upon it and looked at the great time that he had in the East End with all these other mates of his. Look back that way.
Yeah, but it is quite a vivid sort of depiction of a face. You sort of think, well, who is it supposed to be? Because it's quite distinctive.
There is an idea it's meant to be this mad brother Martin, who is this monk that never existed on the site of Mitre Square.
Yeah. The thing that bothers me about it is that, presumably, I have no idea, but just on today's standards, if you were to manufacture something that was pretty unique, there's only 6 or 8 of them or whatever, it would be a very expensive item to have made. So I wonder if it was just a stock face that's stuck on a walking stick, and they just thought, oh well, this is a good idea. We'll just write on it, and it doesn't actually mean anything at all. But that walking stick is a great source of embarrassment to me anyway, because I nearly lost it once. Fully believed that I did. We had it and the Dear Boss letter at the Jack the Ripper conference in Bournemouth, and I put it down, put the walking stick down whilst I went and did something else. When I came back, it had gone, and Adam Wood and I were somewhat. Well, Adam wasn't that worried because he hadn't put it down anywhere. It was my fault. So, but he was anxious because the artifact had gone missing.
He wasn't bothered. He had another one.
Yeah, I was the one who needed a change of underwear. Fortunately, somebody had picked it up and to take it to the safe place. No, take it to the safe place where it was going to go.
Just have this vision of Stuart Evans running away, going, right, I love that.
Yes, the one thing he couldn't display in his exhibition.
Yes,
it would
absolutely
have to be kept secret. Yes.
Now, did they have any audio assistance, like for this exhibit, to where you can? I assume not, because I've never heard any of it. Talk of it, where you can listen to an audio, like a tour guide taking you through the exhibit.
No, there wasn't one of those there.
All right, but they did produce a podcast, video podcast through the History Channel, kind of like a walking tour of the sites, and I found it pretty interesting in that I thought it was well done. here's my positives, and then I'll let other people address the negatives. I thought it was well done in that they used a lot of photographs in an unusual way and some of them I hadn't seen before. And I don't know if the Docklands exhibit encouraged people to leave and go take a tour of the sites, or what the exact purpose of this video podcast was. But who has seen that, and if anyone wants to discuss that?
Wasn't it you, Philip? Yeah, wasn't it you, Philip, that sort of mentioned about one of the routes that they asked on the thing? I've seen it as well, and I remember seeing it. One of the routes from one of the sites going up, I think, up to Mitre Square or wherever, and it says go along here, and you noticed that it would actually mean that if you followed that route in 1888, you probably would have ended up going through some buildings or something like that.
Absolutely.
It was a route that didn't exist at the time, and things like that.
Yeah, that's right. They're saying you're now walking the same route that Jack the Ripper walked. Well, no, you're not, because there was buildings overlying those streets at that time.
Yeah.
Well, there was plenty of small things like that. I remember when the podcast first went up, I wrote down a list of things as I was watching it, and I had to keep hitting the pause button on the screen so often to write things down. I ended up with a page of stuff. None of it was major, but there was an awful lot of small errors in there. It did set some alarm bells ringing.
Now, I know there's a bookshop at the exhibit. Is that do they just sell books, or is what kind of merchandising do they have at this museum attached to this?
Plastic police hats.
Yeah.
Really?
Seriously, yes. Yeah. Plastic police hats, police notebooks, truncheons. Yeah, truncheons.
You can get the booth poverty map on a mouse pad.
Yep.
Oh.
Yeah, everybody's going to have one of those.
So it really is tacky. They've made it tacky.
And you can get the booth poverty map on a notebook.
Yes.
And you can get the booth poverty map on table napkins, and you can get the booth poverty map on...
They have a T-shirt with it on. I can't remember.
Oh, yeah. But you don't get it all on unless you got extra large.
Yeah. Well, I couldn't resist. I had to get the mouse pad. I mean, I'm going, that was so tacky. I just brought it home, and every time I look at it, I just groan, and I move the mouse across the front.
You can follow
That's not the wisest investment in the world
with your mouse.
There's just something supremely ironic about the poverty map being what they've chose to market their rampant consumerism.
Yeah.
I mean, that's...
It is. That's why I got the mouse pad. This is just so wrong. And so, of course, I rewarded them by giving them my £3.50 or whatever it was, better £3. But I went, I've just got to bring that home.
Curiously, they've generated a series of postcards for sale actually at this particular exhibition, and it's interesting the images they've picked out. They're not cheap postcards either. They've done a reproduction of the Dear Boss letter both sides on an oversized postcard. They've got the obviously the Nemesis of Neglect image from Punch, but they've also picked out an image that they're using, this very obscure French one from 1891 that was in a newspaper at the time. Was it Le Monde Illustré, I think, something like that. But it's the one that shows the discovery of Francis Cole's body under an archway. Now, of course, the Francis Cole's is very ancillary to the case in many respects anyway, and it just seems to be a very obscure image to have picked to have used as a postcard.
Did they address any of the non-C5
Yes, they did. Yeah, they did all of them. But they even, they covered Rose Millet, they covered Francis Jackson, the Pinchin Street Torso, the whole lot.
Oh, wow.
So they're to be praised for that, certainly, because I think a lot of exhibitions wouldn't have bothered.
Yes, they didn't, but they didn't investigate or do anything with regard to the development of the myth, or and all the suspect stuff and things like that. So it was all kind of fairly straightforward and basic, really. Given that a lot of people would have been going there thinking, oh, Jack the Ripper, he was a member of the royal family, wasn't he, and all that sort of stuff. They didn't do anything to really dispel the myths or to explain how these stories came into existence.
Which is interesting for an exhibition that was predominantly academic in its presentation. you think dispelling myths would be a priority for them?
Yeah, although I think in that respect, perhaps as you say, that was primarily academic in its presentation, that in many, many ways was probably the fault of the exhibition. And I think that they had this academicness right from the very outset, from when they conceived the idea, from when I was sitting with them, when they were very, very early days of, well, look, we got this idea, how do you think we should do it, and all the rest of it. They were academic then. Which is understandable, and I'm not knocking that, but it completely missed the fictional side, and the not so much the fictional side, but the side of the Ripper that's like the fog and the top hat and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
which
it seemed to not acknowledge the myth.
It didn't at all, and I think that was wrong. And it didn't discuss the suspects, and it didn't discuss the whole ball game of everything that's happened ever since. And that was almost treated, I thought, with almost with disdain. It was dismissed.
Okay, how focused on academia could they be with a stuffed dog at the exhibit? Which I can't get over that.
I would have. If they had
wasn't any old dog.
Very well stuffed dog.
Yes, it was a beautifully stuffed dog, as far as I was able to judge. I've never seen very many stuffed dogs to be able to make that kind of judgment.
Had it been a case that there'd been some kind of evolutionary thing where bloodhounds had changed over 120 years, then there might have been a point. But the fact is that you were just looking at a stuffed bloodhound. It could be any old bloodhound, you know. They could have had a live one in there running around.
You've got to put something in an exhibition, haven't you, when you're talking about Burgo and Barnaby? But it would have been nice if perhaps they'd shown photographs and illustrations of Burgo and Barnaby. A
stuffed dog? What exactly does that add to? I mean, everybody's seen a bloodhound. It's not like someone's going to go, oh, so that's what a bloodhound looks like in real life. You know, I mean...
Actually, how many people have seen bloodhounds? Because I can't, to be honest, I can't say that they're that common when I sort of go walking my Jack Russell in the park. I'm not inundated with bloodhounds, so they are quite big dogs. They're to see the stuffed dog there gives you some idea of their size and how powerful they are. And bearing in mind that obviously they expected children to be going around, or students to be going around, many of whom may not have seen bloodhounds, especially if they live in London. You don't see too many bloodhounds.
You didn't really see one then. You saw a dead one that had been stuffed. I mean,
well, this is true, but
appeal to children. Let's show you a dead dog.
Dead dog. Pony rides, 5 pence.
Yes. Oh. And you can, teachers can shield their eyes, and you can avoid
from the big dog.
Avoid looking at the dead dog.
Yes.
Yeah.
At least they didn't have
actually. It's right as you go through an archway, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right, and there's a seat next to it. So if you want to, because I sat on the seat with somebody, and we ended up just looking at the dead dog.
Well, they missed an opportunity. They could have put it in the gift shop, and I would have bought you one, Ally.
Now see that.
Actually, I did kind of like the dog. It just didn't understand why. I know why it was there, but still, it just... Okay.
It was quite a famous bloodhound. I can't remember what its name was now, but it was fairly... Because it baffled me when I got the information for what the card was, and they'd just noted down what it was, and isn't it something brilliant or something? I can't remember. But I thought, what the hell's this? And I had to look up the dog on the internet, and then found that this was actually quite a famous champion bloodhound. So you are looking at a dead champion bloodhound.
It's an elite stuffed dog.
It is. It's a very important
stuffed
dog. Yeah.
Well, does anyone...
The parrot sketch is coming here, I think.
It is.
Yes,
I've been waiting for it.
Does anyone know if they have events to commemorate the anniversaries of the murders, or if there's any more like guest speakers upcoming? I mean, anyone can go on their website and look, but just off the top of anyone's head, if anyone's aware of...
No, there are a whole series of talks, aren't there, throughout the life of the exhibition.
I was going to ask Paul if he, in speaking with Adam Wood, has learned anything about what the one-day mini-conference will entail, if anything's been let slip, or if he just happens to be aware.
I know absolutely nothing about it whatsoever, and I haven't discussed it with Adam, and in fact I'd forgotten that it was happening. So I have no idea what that's all about at all.
This is in conjunction with the exhibit?
Yeah, I think it's one of the last talks, isn't it? It's or last events. It's something to do with something.
Yeah, there's supposed to be a one-day mini-conference held, I believe, on October 12th.
Right.
From the makers of the UK conference.
No, I have no idea about it at all.
Well, I think it's Adam Wood is behind this. I don't think the A-list have any connection to this mini conference that will be going ahead.
I'm just going by what I read in the little brochure, and they said nothing really about it except that there would be one of these, and I was wondering when details would start to emerge regarding it, but not yet. So.
Sure.
Oh, it's something I can go and run off and ask Adam about. That's always
they've got talks about every 2 weeks. There's none in August, but the final talk of all is on the 30th of October.
I went to one last weekend before last. I think it was 22nd of June. It was the one about the Jewish East End.
Oh, right, with Jerry White.
With Jerry White, Ian Sinclair, Rachel Lichtenstein, and Bill Fishman.
Was that good?
That was very good, because there wasn't not much about Jack the Ripper in it. I think the only person who sort of really mentioned him to an extent was Ian Sinclair, because of his novel. But each one had a different take on the East End, so it wasn't just about the Jewish East End, because Ian Sinclair was talking about how he walks around it and finds all these different, semi-mystical things in it, or just the sort of his personal history of being around it. You got a lot from Rachel Lichtenstein about her sort of personal quest to find out her history, her Jewish history in the area, and how she found out about the area and various places from her own sort of quite a human story. And then you had Bill Fishman, who's I think he's coming up to about 90 now. Who gave a wonderful account of the Battle of Cable Street, which he was at as a 15-year-old boy, and Jerry White gave a sort of an overview and mentioned about Rothschild buildings and things like that, which he's obviously written the book about. And it was good, and there was a lot of discussion afterwards, but each one had their own sort of angle on it, and that was very good. I was glad I went to that one. There was a few people from the Whitechapel Society were there as well. And I enjoyed it. Yeah, it was good.
Yeah, I really wanted to go to that one, because I'm a great admirer of Jerry White ever since I read Rothschild's Dwellings, and his London in the 19th century is that's available in paperback now is an excellent book.
So
it was a good it was a good thing. It was
these discussions that they are hosting then do. In large part make up for some of the drawbacks of the exhibit itself then, because although you have to pay to see every discussion you'd like to go to separately, but
that's not strictly true. I've been to one of the lunchtime series and they're completely free.
Oh really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. So that it is pretty cool that if you are interested in the subject and want to learn more than what the exhibit had to say, you can attend all these different discussions throughout the length of the exhibit on all those various topics and stuff.
Yeah,
absolutely. Certainly the lunchtime one I went to, I think the majority of the audience do actually remember Jack the Ripper.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, the good thing about the talks, I think, is the fact that they have a discussion at the end, which is quite nice. Instead of you just sort of sitting there getting a lot of information from those who know, you can actually engage with them afterwards, and you get quite a lot of time. And I think that's quite a nice idea. So, when issues come up, people can actually talk about. When I was at the Jewish East End one, there was the guy from the Jewish East End. Oh, I can't remember what it's called now, the Jewish East End Society or whatever. Clive, who was talking about the closure of Bancroft Road Library. So he sort of brought that up, and that all the speakers have obviously used Bancroft Road, and we're all a bit So they were so he brought that up, to the general. To the people that were there. So it just gives a platform for people to sort of talk about certain things on, rather than just sitting there soaking up a lot of information.
I don't want to sort of go, I'm getting the feeling that we're kind of drawing to the close really at the moment. I don't want us to go away from this with a feeling that this exhibition is a bad exhibition. I think it's a good exhibition. In fact,
it is good. Yeah.
It's in many ways it's an excellent exhibition. It's just easy for us to be able to pick holes and say, well, they should have done this, they should have done that, and all the rest of it. And yes, if they had consulted more with people, then the exhibition would probably have been better than it is. But or it would have taken different directions than the way it is. But of course, it's always very easy when you've got the thing complete and sitting there to improve on it. Whereas when you're trying to think, I remember when they're saying, well, what should we have in the exhibition? It was kind of when you go turn up cold and you get this put at you, it is kind of difficult to conceive of how you're going to how it should be done. And so I think they did a really good job. The book was a major letdown because it wasn't about Jack the Ripper. But
for me, who did spend the money to fly across, and that was one of the reasons I went back to London, besides to go to O'Bailey and attend a couple court trials, it was worth my £8 to get in. I learned some new things out of it. I came out with a bunch of notes that weren't necessarily related to the Ripper, but were related to the time period. So, no, I could see where they could have tweaked it, but in general, I've seen far worse exhibitions, so I would have no objections, even for somebody on the U.S. side who would spend the considerable amount of American dollars to get over there. That it would be worth the trip, definitely.
Well, I think everybody's in a consensus that it's worth the money to go see, and like our listeners have heard, some of our guests today have gone more than once. So. We will wrap up the show. I want to thank everyone for being on.